Mark Rogers TV providing you, the college football fan, with instant analysis throughout the day. We've got USC and UCLA, and it's a special one, and we previewed it all week with Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football. So it would only be appropriate to have Tony wrap it up for us with USC coming out on top 28-23. Just in the first couple minutes of this game, Tony, UCLA shot itself in the foot enough for a 60-minute game, and you can just take it from there.
Yeah, look, not to take anything away from USC. USC played very well. They did what good teams do when you win and when you're undefeated at home. But UCLA was self-inflicting the pain tonight. They gave up 206 yards in kickoff and punt return yardage to USC tonight, which is just an absurd number. Of course, the first play that I think you were talking about with the punt return, where the entire UCLA kick coverage team went field left, but the punt went field right, and Pittman returned at 75 or 72 yards for a touchdown all by himself. It was one of the more bizarre punt returns, punt coverage plays I've ever seen. And right there, you're like you said, you're down. You shoot yourself in the foot. You're down 7-0 early to a good USC team. Another play late in the first half where UCLA punted the ball and Pittman looked like he was going to let it just die, and UCLA stood up. The kick coverage team or the punt coverage team stood up and stopped, and then he picks up the ball, runs 20 yards. SC gets it around the UCLA 40-yard line. And it caps off with a Darnold 2-yard touchdown run late in the second quarter. So at that point, you've got your special teams. USC marched downfield on that series, no question. But your special teams is basically responsible for giving up 14 points at that point. Add in a Molson missed field goal, and you've built yourself a big hole to come back out of. UCLA did. They showed well. They showed better than I think most people expected. I think for those who followed the coverage all throughout the week, it was supposed to be a blowout. USC was a 16-point favorite, and a lot of people were taking the upside of that because they thought it would be a blowout. The highlight matchup of the game with Rosen against Darnold. Rosen far outplayed Darnold by a lot. But there were also mistakes. There was an interception in the end zone that proved to be costly. There was a fumble, which by no means was Rosen's fault. His center just got blasted right back into him, and he fumbled the ball as he went back to throw. Rosen had a terrific game, but Rosen finishes his UCLA career 0-2 against SC. And we talked earlier in the week what that's like for your legacy when you don't do well against your crosstown rival.
Unfortunately for Josh Rosen, he comes to UCLA, and he arrives on campus at a point in which Jim Mora had upgraded the program, and the program was headed in the right direction. It had gone from a 500 program for the couple years prior to, and then winning as many as 10 games out of 13 and finishing close to top 10 in the nation. And then Josh Rosen suffers through, an 8-5 campaign, I believe, that first season in which they lost to Nebraska in the Foster Farms Bowl. And then last season, he couldn't complete the season that ended up being a 4-8 campaign. I think he was 3-1 or 3-2 through his portion of the season early on. And now this season, in which they're going to have to beat Cal next week, where both teams are playing for a bowl bid at 5-6. I'll try to balance out the USC perspective a little bit. I can't do it as nearly as well as you do it from the UCLA side. But Rosen, yes, clearly played the better game than Darnold. Both quarterbacks showed us, and Rosen far more. I'd say Rosen looked to the NFL prospect 85 or 90% of the time, and Darnold did 20 or 25% of the time. But Darnold did rip off some throws that shows why he's a superior prospect. But Rosen did it consistently. That's what was fun for me, was watching the two quarterbacks when they were throwing at their best. And again, for Rosen, it was most of the time. For Darnold, it was a slice of time in which they show you what they can do that just pretty much nobody else in the nation can do. particularly from the pocket. Baker Mayfield's another type of player. Those two guys are exceptional. I will say that USC obviously left points on the field in which Darnold, they didn't have the timeouts at the end of the first half. Darnold runs the ball, trying to escape the pocket. He did. He scrambles. He gets about 3 yards away from the end zone, and they cough it up there in terms of downs and time. And then he threw that pick in the red zone that UCLA made the play on, but the ball was right to the defensive back, in which Darnold overthrew the receiver down the seam. That gave up some possible points there, and USC had its issues with field goal kicking and wanted to stay away from that portion of the game. As much
what Darnold showed also, which was impressive, was his escapability. UCLA didn't lay a hand on him most of the night. Even when he was pressured, he would get out of the pocket. He can throw on the run. He at times really is more accurate throwing on the run than he is sitting back in the pocket. He is deceptively quick back there in terms of his decision making when he does take off, because UCLA had 1, maybe 2 sacks total for the night. They put pressure on him, but when they did, they didn't lay a hand on him. In other words, even when he got the ball off, they weren't really getting clean hits on him at all. And he kept drives alive throughout the night by utilizing that escapability that he does so well.
Tony Siracusa joining us from Last Word on College Football to break down the Trojans' win over the Bruins 28-23 in what I again was reminded of tonight as the prettiest game in college football in terms of the video on the screen with the two uniforms in the field and the whole deal. Just downgraded a little bit from the off years when they play at the Rose Bowl and UCLA's at home, because that even gives it a little bit more glimmer and artistry to the field in particular. But you know, this is the age-old question: why doesn't this team show up all the time? So in my estimation, it's not fact, but I believe USC to be the best team in the Pac-12. They haven't always played like it, but I believe from a talent perspective, and also if you judge the performance through 12 games, I believe they're the best team in the Pac-12. Not by a considerable amount, but I think that's a fairly reasonable argument. UCLA ran the ball on this team. Stanford couldn't run the ball on this team, and UCLA did a reasonably good job at running the ball on USC. And USC ran it. Ronald Jones had about 4.5 yards per carry, but they didn't run it down their throats. They didn't just gobble up yardage like it was nothing. UCLA provided a lot of resistance defensively. This team that we saw tonight out of UCLA doesn't show up week to week.
Yeah, look, I think you bring up several good points in that. UCLA ran the ball more effectively than they usually do. I think in the net yardage, when you look at the stats tomorrow morning, it's going to show that they ran for 55, 60 yards, but that's because sacks and loss of yards count against your net rushing yardage. But they had about 118, maybe 120 gross, because Jamabo ran for 62. And Bolu Olurunfemi ran for another 56. So between the two of them, they had about 118 yards. And it was effective, and it was good. And I think they probably could have even carried the ball a little bit more, although at the end, Olurunfemi looked like he was trying to carry the ball on one leg. He was so banged up. And it was effective, and it helped Rosen's game. It helped, open up the middle of the field for Rosen. And Rosen had one of those nights where he was in his zone. He's not like this every night. UCLA fans wish that he were, but he's not like this every night. He threw for over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. It was a great night when the lights were on the brightest. USC's rushing, as you pointed out, Jones rushed for 122 yards. And they had about 157 yards gross in the rushing category. But it wasn't the type of rushing game that you would expect out of USC against a UCLA defense that was last in the nation against the rush. You and I both expected Jones to dominate. And really about 47 of those yards were in the last 2 series. And those were the last 2 series where you could see the UCLA defense starting to tire. Really, when USC got their last touchdown of the game, that was really the one series where you could see UCLA's defense tire. It was the one time when SC gashed them down the field, and the only time they gashed them down the field like that for a touchdown drive. So it was a good effort by the UCLA defense. on a given night, but it was something that they clearly could not do over the course of an 11 or 12 game season. They never even came close to a performance like this defensively against a good team. Not at all.
And I understand it's a rivalry game, and we see this all over the place where one team rises from the ashes and ashes. I'm being a little melodramatic there. We've got a 5-5 team taking on an 8-2 team or a 9-2 team, so it's not necessarily just opposite ends of the spectrum. But one's clearly better as a 16-point favorite, and one rises up to play the game of the year for it against a team that maybe USC played a B or B- game. They didn't play awful. And during that one touchdown drive that you allude to, there was a play where Kenny Young was trying to get over from his linebacking position and pick up Stephen Carr out of the backfield, and he ran into his teammate and allowed Carr to get downfield and haul in a pass from Darnold for 25 or 30 yards. That didn't help either. And when we both alluded to the UCLA mistakes right out of the gate at the beginning of the game, right on that first drive, they had that beautiful play from Rosen to Jordan Lasley. He hauled it in for like 55 yards, but they had a legal man downfield because they were also setting up an option for a screenplay. And then Rosen comes back the next series and throws almost the exact same ball on the same pattern to Lasley. And Jordan Lasley, 10 catches for 204. He's a junior. I don't know if he's going to come back, but this is a guy who, unfortunately, based on his own undoing, from what I understand, could have been more effective this season and could have been a bigger impact for Rosen in the passing game.
Yeah, he missed 3 games because of a suspension. And for what he was suspended, we don't know. Mora keeps those things in-house. But he came back last week against Arizona State and had a good game. And it was interesting. Earlier in the week, you and I were talking significantly about what this rivalry looks like, in LA, and the high school teammates becoming rivals. One of the things that I think we may or may not have talked about is I actually only live a 10-minute Surface Street drive from the Rose Bowl. But in order to get there, I drive through a lot of parts of town that are old money USC homes, including driving by Pat Hayden's house, actually, on my way to the Rose Bowl. A little bit of irony there. But we had talked about what high school teammates do or what they become in this rivalry. And Jack Jones from SC was the one responsible for guarding Lasley in one-on-one coverage most of the game until he got hurt halfway through the fourth quarter. They were high school teammates at Sarah. And now they're going at it one-on-one in this great rivalry. And on Lasley's second touchdown, you may recall, he actually got flagged for unsportsmanlike conduct because after the touchdown, he turned around to Jones and started telling him, started giving him the what for about how he scored on him. And that's what happens in this rivalry. Whether Lasley comes back or not is to be determined. He's got a tremendous amount of talent. I think he lacks some of the on-field maturity that NFL scouts would like to see. But players like that, especially ones who've been in the doghouse, may be looking for, the back door out of the doghouse and into the next level. So he hasn't made any comments one way or the other. Clearly, he also knows he's going to have a new quarterback next year, and that may come into factor in his decision as well. He's not going to have someone as skilled as Josh Rosen sitting there finding him all night.
When you look at the game log, through 11 games, and he's missed 4 games. So the other games against mostly quality competition, he has always made a major impact in these games. 4 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown, 4 for 62 against Memphis, hit up Stanford for 11 catches for $158, 7 for 146 against Colorado, 6 for 77 against Arizona. The last 2 weeks, Arizona State, 7 catches for $162, and then again tonight, 204 yards on 10 receptions against USC. Wow.
Yeah, he's got the skill, and he's always had the skill. It's about keeping him on the field. When he's there, he's impactful. And when you factor in the injuries that UCLA has had in the last 3 to 4 weeks to receivers, they actually had a lot more depth a month ago, and yet Lasley was still getting those kinds of numbers 3, 4, 5, 6 games ago when he was playing earlier in the season before the suspension. So even with that kind of depth, he was still a standout target for Rosen. He's got a big decision to make, and I don't think there's anyone, maybe other than himself, that has any clue as to where he's going to go next.
All right, Tony. Hope to catch up with you sometime this week for the finale, because Cal, UCLA, it intrigues me from this standpoint. You've got very different expectations, but you have two teams with the same opportunity and the same record at 5-6. So for Cal, getting to a bowl game is huge based on where this program's been, as you well know, for the last couple of years, to get to 6-6. And they played a really good game tonight against Stanford in losing by just a field goal, versus UCLA with higher expectations. They were 4-8 last year, so it would be technically an improvement to get to 6-6 in a bowl game, but not necessarily. It's almost a must win for UCLA. That would be the sigh of relief, versus Cal saying, hey, yeah, we get 15 more practices. We get to play a national TV game and a bowl game and get that exposure and that experience. And just, it's a plus versus a, hey, we need to avoid disaster here and win this game and at least get to a bowl game for UCLA.
And I think as we get into next week, I think we'll have also a sense of where the world spins in Jim Mora's universe. Because if you look at tonight, I think you can well look at the athletic department, the administration, saying, wow, we were overmatched, played a great game. Yeah, he lost to USC for the third year in a row. But boy, the guys played tough and they hung in there, and good for Jim and good for the boys. If you look at the fan base, I can tell you from already having heard from a lot of them, they're pretty irritated because it was a self-inflicted loss to a great degree, because of the way UCLA lost, because there was a lack of discipline in some critical parts of the game. And right now, he's 28-27 in his conference coaching career, and that's pretty bleak. And if you lose next week against Cal, you're 5-7. You're only one game better than you were last year, where you were missing Josh Rosen for more than half the season. And boy, that's a pretty tough sell to make to the administration.
Yeah, I've got to think it's a program, and we've talked this discussion a number of times, that has to have a baseline of, we're basically an 8-4 program. And some fans don't want to hear that. They want to hear we're going to compete for national championships. I think that's possible at UCLA, but in terms of year in, year out, you can't expect that. But over a slice of time, and more is at about 5 years, right?
This is year 6.
Year 6,
Yeah.
6 years in the books, one game shy of it. You got to think that UCLA is a program that should consistently compete for conference championships. Sure, you're going to have a down year at 6-6 once in a while, maybe every 5 years, but the other 2 or 3 years within that 5-year span, you're doing your 8-4, 9-3, and then 1 or 2 out of 5 years, bam, you win 10, win 11, get to a Pac-12 championship game, and possibly a college football playoff. And that should be the 5 or 6 year slice of UCLA football, at least in my estimation.
No, correct. You've got to compete. You've got to be competitive for the Pac-12 South title on a regular basis. You've got to win it every handful of years, like you said, and then beyond that, win the Pac-12, every handful of years. But you got to at least be competitive for it. And if you lose to a 5-6 Cal team next week that is on the upswing, as you said, they're a young team and eager to get those extra practices in for a bowl game, then you've got some real challenges ahead of you, knowing that you also have lost your lifeline at quarterback, because there's zero doubt Rosen's leaving, after this season.
Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football, breaking down UCLA football as the Bruins almost get it done, but not quite, against the Trojans, losing 28-23 despite 421 yards through the air from Josh Rosen. Join Tony and the rest of the staff there at Last Word on College Football as they get you set for rivalry week for the rest of the nation here coming up on Thanksgiving weekend. Tony, I always appreciate the discussion and learn something from you.
Glad to do it, Mark.